Welcome to the episode. This is the Magician and the Fool podcast, and we are on episode number 42. If it sounds like I'm talking with a really kind of creepy voice right now, it's because I'm trying not to wake up my family because everybody's sleeping. My name is Dominic. My co-host's name is Janice, and you will hear from him after this intro. Today we have the pleasure of speaking to just a fabulous human being, Mr. Jack Grayle. Jack is a working sorcerer who authored Ixar's The Hecateon, out of print, as well as various articles for Anathema, Aeon Sophia, Hadean, Catabasis, and Sabbatica Press. He teaches courses on the esoteric aspect of Homer's Iliad and the Odyssey, which you should absolutely check out. It's fantastic. And he teaches that alongside former guest of the show, T. Susan Chang. You can find that course on the website grayle-lore.teachable.com. That's grayle-lore.teachable.com. He also teaches on the magic of Hecate and the Greek magical papyri at theblackthornschool.com. He's been invited to present at numerous events such as the Black Flame PDX, the International Left Hand Path Consortium, and the Welsh Occult Conference. Updates on his work may be found at his website, jackgrayle.com. We had a really great discussion which seemed for the most part to orbit around the idea of the daimonic emanations of the gods, those versions of the gods that are most accessible, an aspect that can be interacted with. And we explored the idea of the epiphanies, and how the gods presented themselves and manifest themselves, and are available through these epiphanies. And when we speak about daimons, generally the word spirit is interchangeable with daimon, although oftentimes gods could be called daimons depending on the context, and spirits of the dead can be called daimons, so it can get a little confusing. When we say daimon in this episode, it's generally that lower emanation, the ambassador or deputy or representative of the gods in question. And I'll read a little excerpt from On the Mysteries by Iamblichus about daimons. He's talking about the gods, the heroes, the daimons, and the souls. He says, "The daimons, which are more immediately dependent upon the gods, though far inferior to them, follow in their train. They are not the primary initiators of actions, but submit themselves to the service of the goodwill of the gods they follow, revealing in action their invisible goodness, while likening themselves to them, producing creations which are in their image, giving expression to the ineffable, and causing the formless to shine forth in forms, bringing out onto the level of manifest discourse that which is superior to all reasoning, and receiving already that degree of participation in beauty which is innate to them, while providing and conveying it unstintingly to the class of beings that come after them, which are the souls, aka us." He also says, "By daimons I mean the generative and creative powers of the gods in their furthest extremity of their emanations and in its last stages of division." Before we move into the episode, I'd like to just say thank you to our Patreon supporters. As always, you guys keep the lights on here, so we really appreciate that. If anyone else would like to join as a patron, please feel free. Go to patreon.com, look up the Magician and the Fool podcast, and you can find information there on how to help us out. Anyone can also feel free to give us a rating and review on iTunes, and that seems to make us more available to more people, which is cool. We dedicate this to Hermes and Asclepius, and may the merits that we accumulate be distributed to all sentient beings, so that they, together with us, will equally realize awakening. Okay, we are here with the amazing Jack Grayle. Thanks for coming on, Jack.
Thank you so much for having me, Dominic. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, we're grateful for it.
Absolutely. I've had the pleasure of getting to know you online over the past, I don't know, year or two, and it's nice to actually see you in semi-real life here on the video.
Yeah, it's been great, man. I've enjoyed it very much, and it's nice to meet you, you and Janice, face to face.
So, before we kind of delve into our topics, let's maybe just hear about what you've got going on right now. Maybe you can introduce yourself to people who may not know who you are.
Oh yeah, of course. Well, no, most won't. My name is Jack Grayle, and I wrote a grimoire dedicated to Hecate called the Hecatian through the publisher XXR, and I teach courses on the magic of late antiquity and on Hecate. I have a class on Hecate called Walking the Forked Path through the Blackthorn School, which is an online entity, and I have another class on the Greek magical papyri called PGM Praxis, which is a year-long course where we cover about 50 spells from the PGM through the course of 12 months, with a new spell every week being released with notes and discussion about that. And I just started a new course called Godsong, which is a year-long exploration of both Homer's Iliad and Odyssey, where we read through both works and try to look at them, not just from the literary sense, but from the standpoint of the esoteric, right? I mean, these are works of literature, unlike the PGM or the Orphic hymns or the Hermetic material. They're works of literature, but they still, given how old they are, they still give us a glimpse into what is probably the Bronze Age mindset when it comes to deities and epiphanies, how prayers, devotion, sacrifice, faith work. So I'm all the courses, although they sound kind of different, they kind of tie in, or I flatter myself, that they tie in. Of course, Hecate crops up frequently in the Greek magical papyri, in the PGM. And there's lots of, in late antiquity, the PGM contains lots of references to fate, to necessity, to ananke. And they're obsessed with that idea of what is your fate versus what is your choice? What's within the realm of the possible, and what is your destiny? And some of those questions are addressed, of course, in Homer's Iliad and Odyssey. So it's kind of fun to interlock them and see how they complement each other and where they're different, So I basically spend a lot of time, like I am now, yelling at my laptop in my attic, surrounded by African masks and Thai amulets and Hecatean images and the occasional snake skin. So that's who I am and what I do.
Well, you got to have the snake skin.
Yeah, right. I mean, I think it's a litmus test for a sorcerer, right? Do you have?
Absolutely, yeah. Yeah, I have a snakeskin box actually that I really like.
Oh, very nice, very nice.
Speaking of snakeskin, I told Genesis the other day it was pretty amazing. I live out in the Pacific Northwest. We don't see that many snakes, and I was out doing some. There's a forest nearby that I go to and do some work, and I was sitting in kind of a contemplative mode, and at the end of it, I looked down at my feet, and there was a full snakeskin just on the ground right there.
Oh,
yeah.
Oh my God.
Yeah, that was pretty amazing.
That is, you save it for an Agathos Daimon, right?
Exactly.
That's
a
wonderful client.
Yes.
Well, that's perfect. This is perfect because the sun just entered Leo, and the first decan of Leo is associated with the Agathos Daimon. So we're kind of in that period, in that pylon of the Agathos Daimon right now.
I love that. And, for any listeners not familiar with it, Agathos Daimon means the good spirit, right? Who could be both the spirit of the harvest and your property that you would pour out a glass of wine to when you feasted at the end of the harvest, or it could be the more cosmic version of the good spirit of the created cosmos, whose embodiment, was a serpent often in household shrines and those kind of things. And as you know, the Greek magical papyri has multiple spells directed toward Agathos Daimon. One suggests burning a snake skin to honor it. And I have to say, when I did this spell, this is a warning to all listeners, I burned the snake skin, and as it burned, or the snake slough, and as it burned, I let the incense drift over a mask I was consecrating for that purpose. And then I had the intuitive feeling, like lean forward and breathe it in, because sometimes I breathe in the incense to sort of, take into me the matrix of the offering. And I did, and I inhaled it. My God, I've never been pepper sprayed, but I can guarantee you there are few worse things I've put in my body than burning snakeskin fumes. Oh my God, it was awful.
I know. Sometimes I wish I had like a camera to film like the magic bloopers, because I have made some pretty stupid missteps over the years. But I start laughing when I do something like that because I think it's hilarious, and it's so fun to laugh at yourself when these things happen.
It's one of the things too that I like. One of my pet peeves is what I call pagan porn, which is where people have these long descriptions, these perfect rituals that go out without a hitch, as the mist rolled in, I lay naked on the pentacle, and the candles lit for hours, and I lay there and, mounted by the goat. I'm like, wait a minute, don't they have mosquitoes where you live? Like, how does that work? How do you light 5 candles and they don't go out for hours? Like, how did you carve this thing so that did you have a tarp? Then why didn't the wind blow? Like, wait a minute, anyone who's done this work, half of my rituals end up with me stomping around, coughing and pounding my chest, or trying to use my phone to read the thing. I'm with you, Janice, man. I think you're not doing it right unless something's going wrong, ironically.
Right. As I walk into the temple, I light the candles and then I trip and fall on my face. And then when I get up, I walk into the wall and then... But somehow it all works, and somehow things work anyway. And but I was going to say the use of the mask thing is interesting to me, that you associated it with, or that you were using it as part of an Agathos Daimon, right? Were you consecrating the mask to then later use in invocations when you invoke Agathos Daimon?
You know what? There's this quote from Shakespeare, if I can be pompous. It says, a poet's role is to give to unembodied things a local habitation and a name. And sometimes when I invoke a deity I'm not used to calling forth, I like to have an object or an item or something that I ask them, to become associated with. I won't say inhabit, but to become part of, so that I can focus on a material object and, stop waving my hands in the air. And so I had a really nice African mask, and it was actually kind of a 2-part mask. It had a face of someone who looked very serene on it. And then perched on the top of the mask was a humanoid figure that was crouched over and leaning down and pressing his cheek fondly against the forehead of the lower mask. And, in African masks, they often have a small humanoid figure on the top, which is sort of, if I can, meant, I think, to indicate the diamond of the person, or the spirit that's personal to him or his family or her and her fortune, And so I love this mask because often they're kind of fierce or ambiguous, but this figure was literally embracing its host. And I love that. And I love the fact that Agathos Daimon, despite having serpentine imagery, is, meant to be a benevolent force, good spirit. And so it was a way, I already had the mask. I thought every time I do this right, I'll burn the incense, I'll let it drift over this mask, and that mask will come to sort of be a locus for this spirit in my personal praxis. So it was just something I did privately to do. And then I take a whiff. I thought, God, I did that mask no favors. That smells.
I'm with you. I lit some snakeskin in my office here at night and had to frantically open the windows and kind of fan everything out before my wife burst through to see what the hell I was doing.
It's shocking. It's shocking. I mean, in a good way, I think, but for that reason, we should probably use it as asphyxia or something like that. Like you could use it to banish, a goetic spirit that won't leave. It's like, I'll burn the snakeskin and then bam, it's just gone.
Right.
I mean, it might be best if it was crushed to a powder and then added to another incense with other serpentine associated plants that are less pungent.
Yeah, yeah. No, that's a good idea. Or
Mhm.
more pungent. Jesus, why not? Well, maybe just
Yeah,
get
sure.
pepper and fecal materia and asphodel and make something that'll banish anything, including myself. When you burn it.
Well, I like that you mentioned Agathos Daimon and the fact that, because we're going to be talking about epiphanies, I think that's going to take kind of center stage here potentially. It's a fascinating topic, but with the Agathos Daimon, yeah, you have the spirit of the land potentially, but then you also have the larger cosmic emanation of Agathos Daimon. So with these epiphanies that we're going to be talking about, there's many layers of maybe the way that the gods appear to us and how they manifest.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you mind, since we're talking about, do you mind if I read one of the invocations to the Agathos Daimon from the
Oh,
Greek?
go
No,
for
please
it.
do. Yeah, no, that's 100 with us.
Yeah.
Fantastic. This one, it's from PGM for 1596. It's a consecration rite to ask the Agathos Daimon to consecrate an item, which is really cool because it's an all-purpose rite. So you could use it to consecrate a talisman, a phylactery, a blade, anything really. It's really open-ended, which is one of the things I like about the PGM is oftentimes it's fluid, it's flexible, it gives you options, and it calls upon Agathos Daimon, which you'd think it's kind of surprising. You'd think it'd call on Hermes, or someone like that, or Thoth. But, it calls upon Agathos Daimon for this beautiful conjuration of that spirit in his more cosmic form, which is kind of understandable because, as is traditional in Egyptian magic, the sorcerer is sort of stepping into the shoes of the demiurge to create something, to create as the demiurge creates. And just as in, ancient pharaonic magic, that priest would call himself Heka, the first utterance of the demiurge, who's the elder brother of all created things that followed, and therefore have the authority to create magically. So in the PGM, thousands of years later, the sorcerer calls forth a creator, a cosmic deity, to partake in that energy, to allow himself, herself, to create something as well, to create sacrality, to create, a beautiful item that has subtle powers as opposed to the simple ones. So I'm going to read part of this conjuration. I'm going to skip around because there's parts of it that either have too many magical voices or things like that. But just to get some sense of it, just because I love it, I'm passionate about it. Listen to how they describe this spirit. I invoke you, the greatest God, eternal Lord, world ruler who are over the world and under the world, mighty ruler of the sea, rising at dawn, shining from the east for the whole world, setting in the west. Come to me, thou who risest from the four winds, joyous Agathos Daimon, for whom heaven has become the processional way. I call upon your holy and great and hidden names, which you rejoice to hear, talking about the magical voices which are coming. The earth flourished when you shone forth, and the plants became fruitful when you laughed, and the animals begat their young when you permitted. Echoes there of the harvest God began us. Give glory and honor and favor and fortune and power to this item, and you name it, which I consecrate today. Oh, I invoke you, the greatest in heaven. And then there's a string of magical voices, including, which will sound familiar to many people, Yabath, Abaoth, Sabaoth, Adonai, Great God, Osorenofre. Those right there. Anyone familiar with the headless rite will recognize those magical voices. And then he goes on to say, the shining Helios, giving light throughout the whole world. So here we are conflating Agathos Daimon, as we have from the beginning, with a solar power. You are the great serpent, leader of all the gods, who control the beginning of Egypt and the end of the whole inhabited world, who mate in the ocean. Soy nufti, ninter. You are he who becomes visible each day and sets in the northwest of heaven and rises in the southeast. And then it ends after conjuring each hour of the sun by name and by the animal. That's the phenomenal epiphany of the sun. It ends by saying, you who have set at evening an old man, who are over the world and under the world, mighty ruler of the sea, hear my voice in this present day, in this night, in these holy hours. and let all things done by this phylactery be brought to fulfillment. You, Agathos Daimon, the helper, accomplish everything for me, done by this phylactery. The one Zeus is Serapis. thrown in for good measure at the end.
The thing about Agathos Daimon is, it's very clear too. I mean, this god has primacy. You can't read the magical papyri or other similar sources of that time, including their Hermetica, without recognizing the very essential role and placement of Agathos Daimon or Agathos Daimon, Knuphis. And it's interesting to me because the name literally means the good spirit, or another way we could say that is the spirit of goodness. The essence. This is the essential, self-created, self-conscious spirit of pure goodness, and this is considered the supreme being. So moral relativism doesn't really apply here. I mean, we're saying the supreme being in the cosmos is the spirit of goodness itself.
You've nailed it, Janice. And a lot of people come to the PGM just because all the best conjurations of Hecate come through it. So they go to it thinking it's going to be 300 spells to Hecate, right? And then they discover, what is this? Yahweh and Yao and Abrasax and Helios and Ra and Typhon. And even though there's, so many of these male or masculine deities, they all are masks or faces of that solar phonic power that is, referred to as the beginning of the universe, the cosmic creator. And some of them are more specific, and some of them are cosmic demiurges. But it's replete, like you say, with these conjurations. And Agathos Daimon comes again and again. And one of the shocking things, like you pointed out, is how positive it is. I feel like we're so used to spells that are curses, or they're darker, or they celebrate the more malevolent aspects of these powers. And yet there's so much in the PGM that has beautifully celebrates the beneficial one, which to me, a lot of people draw a hard line. They're like, unless they're Hermeticists or already ceremonial magicians, they're like, I'm not interested in the masculine deities. But you can't, it's very hard to extricate, because the deities in the PGM, are like a tapestry. They're interwoven with each other, and they have complementary functions with each other. And there's a lot to be mined there for people who are looking, perhaps without knowing it, for paternal masculine deities that are positive and that are beneficial, that are benevolent. There's a lot of people that come to the worlds of occultism, neo-paganism, esotericism from a place of father neglect, father abandonment, father abuse, father violation, and it creates a father contempt and its corollary, father hunger. And the PGM provides numerous workings to provide a power, a reference, a way of referencing and accessing and becoming in relation to a paternal benevolent power. If you don't mind, I'm going to read another part of another spell that I'm really fond of. There's a solar father initiation in the PGM. It's PGM 3, starts on line 494. And it's long, but it's a beautiful celebration that begins with almost like a calling of the quarters and ends with a really positive invocation of the positive aspects of the spirit. Let me just read for a moment from it. The sorcerer calls out to this deity, "Come to me in your holy circuit of the Holy Spirit, founder of the world, O God of gods, Lord of the world, who have divided by your own divine spirit the universe. First from the firstborn you appeared, created carefully from water that's turbulent, who founded all the world, abyss, earth, fire, water, air, and in turn ether and roaring rivers, the red-faced moon, heaven's stars, morning stars, whirling planets. It's by your counsels they attend all things. You who summon all things into being. Hear me, O Lord, graciously, gladly, for from every element, from every wind, today, with your happy face, in the present hour, because I invoke your holy name from every side. Come to me with a happy face to a bed of your choice, giving me sustenance, health, safety, wealth, the blessing of children, knowledge, a ready hearing, goodwill, sound judgment, honor, memory, grace, shapeliness, beauty to all who see me, you who hear me, in everything whatsoever, give persuasiveness with words, great God. We give thanks to you with every soul and heart stretched out to you, O unutterable name, honored with the appellation of God and blessed with the appellation of Father. For to everyone and to everything you have shown fatherly goodwill, affection, friendship, sweetest power, granting us intellect, speech, and knowledge. And it goes on to say, we rejoice because you showed yourself to us. We rejoice because while we are still in bodies, you deified us by the knowledge of who you are. And thanks of men and women is to you one. We come to you, a womb of knowledge, O womb pregnant through the Father's begetting, O eternal continuation of the pregnant Father. Bowing before your goodness, we ask no favor, but this, that we be maintained in knowledge of you, and one protection, that we not fall away from a life such as this. If there's a spell in the PGM more flush with gratitude and admiration for the demiurge and celebration of his benevolent aspect, that is the same, though they don't call it the Agathos Daimon. I believe you're praying to that same benevolent aspect of the solar creator in both those conjurations. They're complementary, and references to Zeus or Serapis aside, they are ways of connecting with that benevolent, paternal, and gift-giving power through whom all life flows into all things that have associations of the sun. So I love those workings.
Yeah, I love that example. Thank you for doing that. And it's fascinating because it is a petition. I mean, there's definitely a petition aspect to it, but it's also very reverential, obviously.
Yeah.
And I think that people that come to sorceress works, such as this PGM, are looking for a lot of quick fixes, and I've used the example before, kind of a vending machine approach to the gods, where you put some coins in, you press the button, and you get what you want out of it. This is a little bit different. I think a lot of the PGM, you see this reverential treatment of the gods, and I think there's a part of the PGM, which we've spoken about, which, aside from getting you these mundane problems solved, it's also spiritually enriching, life enriching. It creates a worldview that really kind of expands your mind, expands you spiritually, and really can improve you, other than merely the Band-Aid where you're trying to get some money because your car broke down or whatever.
Well, yeah, and I've been a hardliner on this. I believe that piety is not only essential, but to me, it is a natural indicator of somebody who has made a genuine contact with one of the, one of the gods, whether that be one of the levels of the gods, whether that's cosmic, hypercosmic, or n-cosmic aspects of the divine. Piety is a natural, when you've made contact with the sacred, piety is a natural response to that. You can't help but be filled with love to overflowing and a sense of devotion and respect and admiration and awe before this just resplendent and beautiful and spectacular being that has deigned to grace you with a theophany.
That's beautifully said. That's beautifully said. And I agree 100%. It's like seeing those people, see a YouTube clip of someone swimming with a huge great white shark, or someone petting a grizzly. And you're like, how the hell did that happen? Well, it didn't happen by them threatening it, that's for sure. It happened by probably them spending months gradually closing proximate distance and revealing that they had no damage to offer it, and something good perhaps to give it, and gradually developing a relationship with a non-human unseen power, or a non-human power that was capable of either good or bad, and they managed to form a relationship to it. So I agree 100%. It's a great danger, I think, to treat this work as sort of slot machine magic, which is not to say that it can't work that way.
Right.
But I think, and in fact, I think everyone I talk to seems to know there is such a thing as beginner's luck with magical systems, you know?
Oh, yeah.
And, you know, like the first time you try something, you often get like a weirdly quick result with startling indication that it worked. But then there's a tendency to say, oh, okay, well, I'll just hang on to it. And 9 months from now, if I need to do it again, I'll do it again. As opposed to, I got lucky. I need whatever power that was. They opened the door for me. And now I need to ease in and show them my gratitude, or incorporate them into my practice, or at least make it an offering that shows I respect them and that know that they didn't have to do this, and sort of form a relational bond with them. And, you know, you guys both know, like, this work is not for everyone. And sometimes I get contacted from people saying, well, I don't know if this is for me. Should I take this class or not? Should I buy this book or not? Should I try this spell or not? And one of the questions I ask them is, can you just tell me a bit about yourself? Because if they're able to maintain employment, if they're able to maintain some relationship with some family members, if they have one or two friends, if they have a circle of people that they can work with and act with, well, then you probably have the tools to do relational magic, because you have the tools to form relations with mortals as well. And mortals are spirits too, you know? And so, but when someone says to me, well, I just got fired for the 3rd time in 6 months, and, you know, for the 2nd time, I found out my new apartment's haunted, and I don't talk to my parents or my kids, and I really like some friends. I mean, unfortunately, these people are drawn to, you know, to systems like this. But I don't think that person, if you're not capable of maintaining a mundane relationship with someone, then what are the odds you're going to be able to form a lasting reciprocal relationship with something that's invisible and often silent?
Yeah, that's a very good point. And I think that hinges on another related thing, which is, I believe that the root of piety is love. And to love is to know. You can't love something you don't know, but you can approach with sincerity and an open heart and the willingness to love. And I believe that our relationship with the gods and the spirits, it should start in love and end in love. And in between those 2 points of love is knowledge, gnosis. To love is to know, and to know is to love. And when we know the gods, the very experience of knowing them and being known by them is an experience of true, pure love, the cosmic eros that binds all things together.
Oh, that's really beautiful. And, you know, I would go one step further and say a lot of people experience it, but don't recognize it for what it is, because they're looking for something that looks visually CGI or paranormal, when in fact, and I believe the gods created the mundane world. So a lot of times they give us what we want or what we need through the agency of the mundane world. And as far back as Homer, and these stories may go back far beyond Homer. They may have been created in the Bronze Age. The gods most frequently appear in actual people. You know, Ares will appear in the form of a warrior who just happens to rally the troops and lead them back into battle. Athena will appear as a counselor to the king who gives wise advice. Aphrodite will appear as, a lady's handmaid who brings two people together to find love. They frequently act through human agency to achieve the ends either desired by them, by fate, or by the mortals that they are allied with. So I would agree with you, Janice. And I think part of the challenge, at least for me it is keeping my eyes open and not be jaded, so that when the mundane world interacts with me and when natural forces appear and when people interact with me, I have to keep reminding myself, could this be an epiphany of the divine? What have I asked for? What am I getting? What are they giving me? I'm speaking to this person, but could it be that this is Athena, speaks words? Is it possible that this is the answer to what I've been asking, for the form of, my brother or my coworker or this stranger. And once you start doing that, you start seeing stuff frequently, and it can be ambiguous, but it can also be deeply gratifying to think I'm onto them. I'm beginning to see things, and it sort of sacralizes the mundane in a way that's exciting and makes things fresh.
I love that. I love that so much. And I came to that on my own as well, reading the Iliad and the Odyssey, and then simultaneously doing this work while studying that work. I mean, that's how they appeared to people back then. So why wouldn't they appear to us now in that way through mortals or through this world? I think there's so much rich material here that we can run with. Along those same lines, as far as epiphanies go, I loved the story. I mean, it's a very sad story, and maybe I shouldn't bring it up, but it's a story that you shared about your dog passing not too long ago.
Oh, right.
And the epiphanies that happened as that process was happening, as that transition was happening for your dog. Would you mind talking about that? I thought it was very moving and a great example of what we're kind of getting at here, the kind of overlapping seen and unseen worlds. And we talked about this with Susie Chang a little bit last episode, way back a few months ago, and how it relates to divination and how you can essentially divine by looking at the world around you. Obviously, something like a tarot deck is a more focused way to do it. But the unseen world is interacting with us all the time.
Yeah, no, that's true. And yeah, the anecdote you mentioned is, for listeners that hadn't heard it, I had a beautiful little dog. He was a part Boston Terrier, part pug, little brindle bully. He was a jerk his whole life. He whenever he wanted something, he barked angrily for it. He bit my hand when I tried to pet him, and he'd eat anyone's food. He snored way too loud on the bed, and he was just the best. He was never not a jerk, and he never didn't do what he wanted to do.
I love that little dude already.
Right? He was such a bully. He was all chest and head, and he was missing his left hind leg, which had a weird thing of when he would urinate, he'd duck his head and he would do a handstand and he would pee because he was so top heavy. He was all chest and all head. So since he was missing a leg, he would try to lift the other leg, but he only had one back leg. So when he did it, he'd literally do a handstand. It's just, you had to stand back because, so as not to get squeezed on. He was a hell of a dog. And he lived till he's about 15. And then, of course, he had things happen. He just began to fall apart. And it's, as any pet owner knows, if they don't die suddenly, it's a very difficult process of knowing when is enough, when to put them down, when. And of course, part of my prayers that I would do would, let me know when it was his time, because I didn't want to put him down a day too early. And yet you can't always tell where they're in too much pain, And so in winter, a year ago, it was spring, but it was a really cold spring. But one day it got up in the 50s, and I took him out and put him in the lawn so he could see the violets blooming and smell them. And he lay there smelling the spring wind. And I saw a shadow cross over me. And I looked up, and there were 5 vultures, wingtip to wingtip, circling over us. And I'm not an expert in aviomancy, but it didn't take a Nostradamus to tell me that his time had come. And that night he started crying in pain, and we took him to the vet, and we did put him down. And if you don't mind, since I do that in the class, I thought I might read the spell that I read when we put him down, since it is a spell to Anubis. And Anubis, of course, it is the cycle pump. So he's doubly appropriate in this context. I prayed to this power to take the dog's soul to where it needed to go. And of course, being a dog, I figured that it was couldn't be a better one than that. So I'll just, it's short, and I'll read a few lines from it. It conjured him to say, "Open to me, O earth. Open to me, O underworld. Open to me, O abyss. O gods who are exalted, come into me, O my compeller For I am the pharaoh, lion, ram, lotus is my name. I am Ganta, Gintni, Geritni, Yahor is my name, my true name. Balcom, the powerful one of heaven, Ablanathanalba, the griffin of the shrine of God. Oh, good ox herd. And it was supposed to be whispered, this line. Anubis is the ox herd. It's like the good shepherd, you know. Oh, good ox herd, my compeller, hail Anubis, come to me. O high one, mighty one, master of secrets for those in the underworld. O pharaoh of those in Amenti. O chief physician, good son of Osiris, he whose face is strong among the gods. Appear in the underworld before the hand of Osiris. You should serve the souls in Abydos, in order that they all live through you, these souls, these ones of the sacred underworld. Come to earth. Take care of this little dog. For I am Isis the wise, the sayings of whose mouth shall come to pass. It's such a beautiful conjuration. And it has two opposing, I call them the god faces, the theoses, right? You declare yourself at the beginning, one god face, the pharaoh, lion, ram, solar phonic god. And then at the end, you say you're Isis the wise, who is, of course, the stepmother of Anubis, whose true mother was Nephthys, but who was born of his father, Osiris. So you speak to him as his stepmother, and any good son that's going to ignore his stepmother deserves what he gets. So I love that spell, and it helped me process my grief.
Well, and there was also an epiphany afterwards, right? With a bee.
Oh, that's right. That's right. Afterwards, there was this weird, after the whole thing and he'd been buried, on the porch, or as I sat there, kind of sadly, a few hours later, there was this strange, it's hard to describe, but like a hollow throttling sound. It was really unnatural. I never heard anything like it. It was echoey. And I'm like, where is this? And I couldn't figure out where it was coming from. It wasn't words, but it would rise and fall, and it would create this hollow. And very gradually, there was a pitcher shaped like a fish on the deck. And I walked over to it, and I tilted it toward me, and a bumblebee flew out. And what's funny is Jack, since he was brindle, his colors were sort of like a bumblebee, and we would joke about that. And bees themselves had a tradition in ancient, Hellenic cultures, being souls of the dead. They thought they arose from corpses. And there was something about it arising out of the fish's mouth, this bee, and drifting off peacefully into the air, that it really gave me a sense of closure and completion. And I know I didn't even bother looking bees coming from fish mouths, in ancient texts, but I didn't have to.
Yeah.
I just accepted it. I said that I've never seen anything happen like that before. And the sound was so strange and it was weirdly affecting. So I just chose to listen to my own body and say, this is a sign, that what needed to happen has happened.
And that's a great example, I believe, of immersion in this worldview. When you do immerse yourself in this worldview, you're able to see things like this, and it verifies your practice. I mean, and the experience. And in this way, I think for you, I think it was very therapeutic.
Oh yeah,
to be immersed in this worldview. And it doesn't always have to be a cinematic. You were talking about pagan porn earlier. I don't know if we had the recording on or not at that point, but oftentimes you do hear these stories of, the gods floating down during the ceremony, and it's like a movie, and they're, Hecate's wearing like a chain link bikini, and there's serpents all falling off of her. But it's not always, or I'd say most of the time, not like that. It's more like what you were explaining of these more subtle, what you would say mundane manifestations. But if you have the eyes to see, you can make these connections.
Yeah. And it's something that it's actually kind of important, because there's a lot of, I think magical work that's done today that falls under the heading of path working. And what people usually mean by that is visualizing a series of events in your head, which have, purported spiritual effect. So, if I open a book and it says, here's a path working to connect with Hermes, it might say, you are riding a stallion across the plain, and this golden god comes down with a scepter and helmet. He greets you and hands you a gift. You look at it. What is it? You put it in your pocket. You move on. And I have, even my book has a thing or two like that. But people will do this, and then they'll talk about, well, I met Hermes, or I saw Hermes gave me this. But it's not helpful, I find, to treat that like a full-blown vision of a god. You imagined it in a led meditation, which is cool, but it is different from spontaneously and without planning it, encountering an object or an animal or a phrase or even an image in your mind that's completely unbidden. A word, a license plate, something happening physically within your body, from a crack of thunder to the sweats to something outside your control. And those were typically considered to be, epiphanal moments from the deities. For me to imagine myself walking up to Hecate and her handing me a flaming sword and me waving it around and riding off on a dragon, it's gratifying, but it doesn't make me Lord of the Night World, and it doesn't matter that I imagined it really well. I intentionally imagined it, and it's cool, and my book has some things like that where you imagine walking on a path to prepare yourself for an initiation ritual. But I think there's a danger of conflating what I would think of as epiphanies in the world you detect with your senses, or epiphanies that come in dreams or unbidden visions, and led meditations, which can help to sort of settle our mind and help us envision powers that are often quite different in nature than an actual experience of the phenomenal world intruding into our reality unbidden. So
exactly. Yeah. Exactly. And I was going to say, the ancient sources are very clear about the preconditions for the reception of vision. I think it's necessary for people to understand, because they do rituals and they're like, oh, such and such god or goddess spoke to me. And, they're talking about the voices in their head, and it's really just a simulation of their egoistic, it's an egoistic projection and a simulation of desire. Now, there may be on some level a faint connection with the daimon being filtered through the plenum of the mind, which clothes it in the forms of the psyche. And then that person in turn perceives that through their thinking process. However, true vision, like you said, often comes unbidden or as a result of an effective ceremony. But in order to be able to receive it, the ancient sources state that you must be pure. And the purity thing isn't a value judgment. In my understanding, it has more to do with being psychically transparent, psychically clean, so that you're able to actually clearly perceive the interior realm, which is a very real thing. I mean, if your mind is clouded with all kinds of just psychic derritists from, multiplayer online games and, like, I don't know, I don't watch TV, so I'm just going to, like, who's the fashionable model competition show that you watch every week, and all kinds of other things. Like, your mind's going to be clogged with all this junk.
You nail it, man, because if you're really deep in your led meditational path working, you're trying to block out everything else because you're trying to focus on creating this idea. Whereas, as you know, when you're doing an invocation, it's really important, because whether it's goetic or ceremonial or it's PGM or whatever, much of the time, I'll speak for myself, much of the time I say the invocation and nothing happens. And there's a part of me that clenches up and I say internally, I fucked it up. It didn't happen. And then the wiser part of me said, well, the glowing vision you were hoping for didn't happen. But what is happening? And if I can just breathe through that moment of panic, I say, well, the wind is rising slightly, and the pages of I'm holding are fluttering, and the candle flames are guttering, and the clouds have come away from the moon, and now I can see the moon. And I can feel my heartbeat, which I don't think I could hear before. And off in the distance, I hear an alarm going on. And so that leads you to the second step. Okay, Well, these aren't the glowing manifestation you expected. So you can read the ritual again. You feel like you're in the presence of a power, And gradually, for me, I look at the moon and maybe it looks like an eye, or maybe the siren draws closer, or maybe my heart ceases beating faster for no reason I can discern. And I tell myself, I think something's present. I can't see it, but I'm going to proceed as if it's here. And it's humbling because, because I'm not Simon Magus, but it's also, it helps me be alive to my environment and try to understand how these powers appear to me. And so what if it's not always clear? I'm usually not in a state of purity. So what can be expected of that? Work with what you get, because they're doing the same. They're working with what they get, which is what I bring to the table, which is probably 15 cents in the dollar from what they're hoping for.
I think you make a great point, and I think it comes down to perception. You have to be able to perceive, and like Janice was saying about being clouded up. Obviously, if you just got in a fight with your kids or your wife, maybe your car broke down earlier in the day, and your boss yelled at you, and you had just drank a six pack, and maybe you ate too much, and so you had indigestion. Your perception of the world around you is going to be very different. You're going to have fear, you're going to have anger, you're going to have all these emotions that are going to taint the experience. Whereas this idea of quote unquote purity, you're becoming a clean vessel. You're to as much as you can, as much as possible, so that these experiences are more perceptible, because they may be happening even though you are drunk and you are angry, but you're not going to necessarily, and this is just me, be able to perceive them because you're so clouded. So it definitely makes sense on a very practical level. It
does. And to be fair, people's expectations are often set by the material. And you guys both know, in some PGM spells, you conjure Typhon, and then it says the falcon will come and drop the stone at your feet and collect the stone. Incredibly specific descriptions of phenomenal stuff. And so when people might do the Typhonic initiation, of course, what you often hear is it was not successful. The falcon did not drop a stone at my feet. But the fact is, and what I tell them is, whoever wrote this spell, that was his experience of the epiphany. You notice he didn't say a glowing god with the head of an aardvark appeared and talked to him. A falcon, an entirely natural animal, dropped something at his feet. And he went and looked, and there was a stone, and he picked it up. And that was it became part of his praxis, understandably. What happened when you did it? They say, well, I don't know, a cat kept walking across me while I was in the linen shroud trying to do the work. Well, guess what? A cat is a solar epiphany. All right? Yeah, Typhon, is one of the masks of the solar chthonic god. And yeah, a falcon was part of his cult imagery. But the cat, is not nothing. What else did you hear? What else did you see? What else did you taste? What did you experience? Because your experience, having done that right, is just as legitimate as the sorcerer that did it initially and had a falcon drop a stone. I had someone who took my class tell me afterwards, when she did that right, when she got to the moment, the very end with the magical voices, she heard a loud thump on the window. She went downstairs, and sure enough, there was a songbird with a broken neck outside her front door. It's not a falcon and it's not a stone, but she, I think, entirely legitimately saw that as an epiphany of Typhon in that moment, given the context of what she'd been doing and calling forth. And that's the sort of awareness, and that's the sort of thing I think people can expect to do if they do the work diligently and if they're open-minded enough to see what's happening around them.
Well said.
I think there's also something, on one of the albums by one of my favorite bands, Coil, who incidentally, I think they have one album where it's all recitations of Shakespeare's love letters to someone. Oh. Yeah, it's pretty neat. I think I can't remember, the solar or something. But anyway, one of the sayings on one of their albums is persistence is all. I think that's important because sometimes something's not going to work the first time you do it, but if you do it for 7 days straight, you're going to have a higher likelihood of success success. I think persistence is key. You don't give up. You keep trying till you get it right. So you hit that groove.
I completely agree, especially as someone who often doesn't get results the first time around. As you know, many of the spells in the PGM will say do 7 times, or after you've done this 3 nights running and nothing's happened, now read the compulsion. It anticipates that even the Egyptian priest who's doing it may get 0 night after night after night. It may have to throw in threats or compulsive techniques. It may have to try the 7th night after the 6th night. Like, I find that incredibly reassuring that they'll sometimes say, if that doesn't work, try this. And if that doesn't work, try this. But if you still don't get results, you're like, oh, thank God, I'm not the only one. Oh, well said. Well said.
And that reminds me of another thing in the PGM that you had mentioned at some point. I don't remember the spell exactly, but it says that the spirit will speak to you. No one else will hear it, but
Right.
You will hear it. And so I think that's also reassuring, that these spirits don't necessarily have to manifest visually as something out of a movie in order to be real. But then there's also that fine line of mental health as well that we need to maybe address, as you did mention earlier that this is not necessarily something for everyone, and I think keeping mental health in the forefront of your mind is probably important as well when you're hearing voices.
Yeah, absolutely. There's a thing, I think it's from the so-called Mithras rite, and just flipping open my copy of the PGM. Here's, I think, one of the quotes from the Mithras rite of the response you can expect from that Cosmo creator that you invoke. Listen to this. It says, he, meaning the invoked God, will immediately respond with a revelation. You will grow weak in soul, not be yourself when he answers you. He speaks the oracle to you in verse, and then he departs, but you remain silent, since you'll be able to comprehend these matters by yourself. At a later time, you will remember them infallibly. And then it goes on it talks in a different part about you will hear these things. Other people will not be able to hear them, but you will hear them yourself, right? And it does leave the window open for the fact that when a phrase jumps in your head, or an intuitive leap, or an instinctive realization, that too is an epiphany of the power, and why we have to, be aware of our own internal weather. And as you put, there's a very thin line between hearing voices of your own intuition, instincts, subconscious perhaps, and hearing voices because you're delusional, you're paranoid, you're schizophrenic. And anyone who's been diagnosed as the same should probably, be extremely careful picking the spiritual path, to pick one that gives them the least grief and triggers them the least and is the most healthy for him. Certainly asking to be inhabited by gods or have deities speak in their head or be written or possessed or, is not, I would do a hard bulk at someone with serious mental illness interested in trying these techniques. And there was, there's plenty of mediumistic spells in the PGM, and they even refer at one point to the god as the spirit who enters, convulses, and leaves me. So they're talking about anyone who's been present for a true medium knows that jerk of the shock when the whatever happens. And so we know what they're talking about. But that's a very liminal state to be in. And I think just as you wouldn't go climb a mountain, with a broken leg, if you have, mental or emotional issues that make it dangerous to tell reality from the internal reality or subtle reality, then you probably want to take a hard pass on anything like that. That's for sure.
I was wondering if you can expand on this a little bit more, not necessarily the mental health aspect, because we're not mental health professionals, but the idea of the gods appearing to us in dreams and as epiphanies. I know Gregory Shaw talks about this with his dream work, and the example he gave was a refrigerator, and there was a link to Saturn in that way because of the cold. And it doesn't always have to be an ancient god appearing in the dream either. It could be something mundane, because the gods are working through what we have available to them already. You've mentioned this. They work with what they have, and we supply the material for the epiphany. Oftentimes, when it's a spontaneous thought or a dream. I wonder if you can expand on that as well.
And this is somewhere, again, I'm coming from my own experience, but I've noticed it repeatedly with the people that attend my courses and I talk to, is deities frequently appear to them in dreams as people they know in real life or celebrities. And usually they don't accept them as such because they're looking for a guy in a toga. They're looking for a woman bearing torches. They're looking for a iconic image of a deity that comes from an age millennia before ours. We're not ancient Greeks. We're not ancient Egyptians. And we can celebrate and to an extent even practice a spiritual current, consonant with their spirituality. But we're contemporary people living in contemporary societies. And that means our head is filled with images and songs and movies and sports games with people, we've never seen. I might do an offering to Apollo, but then if I have a dream of Kanye West who gives me advice, what a fool I'd be to say, well, it wasn't a white guy with blonde curly hair, so I guess I can ignore that dream, Or people will conjure. I knew someone who did a prayer to the solar chthonic god, and it was during the last administration, and they had a dream of the president talking to her. Well, she's a progressive, so she's mad at the dream. She says, I did this spell, it didn't work. I had a dream about, president. They said, well, to be honest, you were calling upon a ruler of a whole cosmic system, and you had an encounter with the ruler of the country you live in. So don't discard it out of hand. And it's repeatedly, there's a sense to not value our own times, to be anachronistic, to say, well, it's, I can't do that. That's something I saw on MTV. It's like, well, it doesn't matter. That's, to me, the deities have no form. They're bodiless. Right. Homer calls them the bloodless ones. They don't have bone, blood, body. Their iconography is purely a reflection of the culture of the times. And so when you invite a bodiless, formless entity to enter and have conversation with you, my understanding is it literally, if it chooses to, comply, it rummages through the costume, the trunk of costumes you have that's made up of every person you knew, every movie you saw, every sports game you attended, and every day of work and event. And then they adopt the one that appeals to them.
I'm so glad you said this.
Yeah.
I'm so glad you said this, because this is a thing of mine. This is a big point. And anybody with experience with real spirits, like real genuine spirits, not like little makeup play game stuff, but like, real spirits. If you make contact with the deity, more than likely the communication is going to occur through an intermediary spirit like a daimon or an angel, And I like your costume analogy, which obviously comes from your drama background. I think that it's, is it the God picking forms, or is it that there is an automatic process in the unconscious where the mind clothes the impression from a higher mind in the forms of the mind, so the mind, the communication is clothed in the forms of the mind, in the menstruum of our mind. Because if the soul is like a fluid envelope, the achima is a fluid envelope, the suke, then the communication from the deity, or the ray from the deity, or however you want to envision it, has to pass through that envelope. And as soon as it passes into that envelope, it's like an ovum. Once it passes through the membrane of that cell of the soul, of the aura, of the sphere of sensation, it becomes clothed in the forms of the mind. And so that's necessary, I think, because the soul as an intermediate principle performs a function of translation into terms that we can interpret. I think that if we want to experience the deity on its own terms, though, we can also include that request in our invocation. We can say, I ask that you appear to me in your own form, or in your own form, but in a way that I may understand. And I think, again, purifying ourselves, meditating, abstaining from intercourse, not watching TV or getting less screen time, maybe not eating animal or not eating flesh, all of these things I think can serve to turn the mind inward out of the channels of sense impression that funnel pictures, sounds, sense from the physical senses into the mind. And if we can clear that noise out and then specify, adapt our requests with specific details, we can acquire more clear communication.
That's I can agree with you 100% on all points. And that's not just even, that's consistent with the oldest documents we know. You know, in the Iliad, when Zeus decides to send a dream to Agamemnon to tell him, go attack Troy, he doesn't appear as himself. He has Agamemnon have a dream of Agamemnon's favorite counselor, Nestor, and has Nestor, he puts on the mask of Nestor and tells him to tell the king, now is the time to go attack Troy. Even Zeus himself masks himself in Agamemnon's friend and counselor. And this is a wonderful one. I just grabbed the PGM again, if you'll let me. This is very short. There's a spell in here to send a dream to someone else. So not to get a divinatory dream your own, but to influence someone through a dream that you send. And in this PGM spell, which is from the Daimonic theory, Supplement 101, the spell begins, O Anubis, high one of heaven, go to the underworld. Let the head of Osiris stop being far from him. Let Osiris stop sleeping while his head is far from him, until a forceful spirit that does not sleep at night is sent to stand above the target's head in the form of a god who is great in his heart, and let him do everything which I write for him entirely. So you are saying, Anubis, let Osiris wake up, because Osiris is dismembered in the underworld. Let Osiris allow a spirit of the dead to rise to the upper world, go to the target's house, and appear to the target, not as himself, who the target doesn't know, but as the form of a god who is great in the target's heart. So like if you have a boss who's going to punish you tomorrow, you don't know if the boss worships Abrasax or Helios or Ra or who. So you don't have to. You're not doing the work. The mediators are doing the work. You tell Anubis, wake up Osiris. Tell Osiris to let a ghost up of the restless dead, presumably. Have that ghost go to this boss's house, appear to him in whatever shape that boss respects, and tell him such and such. Don't have me whipped tomorrow. Cut my hand off. So you look at the chain, it's like a goetic chain of authority. It's like a hierarchy, but there's a logic to it. But what's fun is you don't know how he's going to appear. The sorcerer has no idea. You say, pick a face and a form that person will respect, implying that the gods can sort through masks and costumes and identities like we could shuffle a deck of cards.
Fantastic example. And also, you aged yourself earlier with the MTV reference. I don't think they have MTV anymore, do they? No, but seriously.
No, it's cool. And to me, there's a great relief there, because there's a constant sense, no matter where you live or who you are, oh, I wish I lived back in those times. It's completely nonsense. Those times were dangerous, hot, sticky. If you got sick, you were in real trouble. And a lot of times the level of cruelty and deprivation in those times would have, astounded us. We're lucky to live when we live, where we live, despite all the craziness surrounding us. Why do we spend? There's no greater waste of energy, I find, for an esotericist or occultist, than to spend time pretending they're Katy Perry in the Dark Horse video. Like, you're not. You don't have to pretend you lived in oldie-timey days around Stonehenge. You don't have to pretend you're an ancient Greek and swish around in a chiton. That's not part of it. It's okay to call on them as a contemporary person. It's okay to apprehend them in a contemporary paradigm. And in fact, it's fun, because then you get to sharpen your eyes and your ears and your senses, internal and external, of am I getting something? Are they appearing? Am I in relation? Could they be answering me in a way that's not intuitive, that's not my first expectation, which enhances our ability to perceive the unseen, acting through the media of the phenomenal world.
Well, and I think it's useful in that light to understand we've discussed on the podcast before with Different people, I think Gregory Shaw, Butler, Angela Voss, we've discussed, things like synthemata, which, later became understood through the doctrine of correspondences, among other things. I mean, if you understand that if you're dealing with Apollo, whether it's a bee or a sunflower or something made of actual gold, understanding this is a language. It's in the phenomenal world, which is always in a state of change and flux. There is this sort of correspondences that are part of this. You could say the frequency, the radio frequency. Yeah. And, and if you know that, cinquefoil is a mercurial thing, as is topaz, and there are some modern things in the modern world that didn't exist in that world, which could also be analogized. And if you understand that, then you can also understand when a sign arises, which is a clear manifestation of the God. And then on top of that, when you work with spirits, sometimes you start to develop your own personal language with the spirit through offerings. And so then once you've made a certain kind of offering to a spirit or a daimon, then when you see that offering, the daimon may be communicating to you through, a certain, like a cardinal's feather, or something like that. Or you may offer it, say, I'm just coming up with something like, you make an offering of some cardinal feathers or eggs or something, and then you start to see cardinals, and you notice something happens right afterwards, because the spirit has then come to you. You and the spirit have established a locus between the two of you, a common point of communication through a symbol in the natural world. Does that make sense?
It absolutely makes sense. And it has a direct parallel. There's another spell, and I'm thinking of PGM 7, begins on line 795, where you conjure the holy angels as Albio, asking Apollo to send you an angel to allow you mantic skill. And the instructions in the PGM say, the spirit you call, the angel, enters in the form of your friend, whom you recognize. It tells you the angel will appear, but you'll see them in the form of your friend. Of course it does. If it comes, it's there to help. Why would you not envision them as your friend? It's exactly what we're talking about.
So, Jack, how do you see the difference, or is there a difference? Is it just maybe a context issue with the difference between Bronze Age spirituality that you see in say, the Greek worldview and what you see later, as far as how the gods are represented, how they act towards one another? Oftentimes, it's a little bit more literal, and the closer to us you get, they become a little bit more noetic. But the farther back you go, it seems as though they are a little bit more human, since you are kind of delving into Homer.
Yeah, right. Well, one of the shocking things for people who come, as you know, to the Iliad and Odyssey without a background in them, if they're expecting a bunch of noble, respectable, entities in white robes acting graciously, they're in for a sore disappointment, because when they see the soap opera antics of the gods in Homer's works. But it's worth mentioning, because it's a great question. Homer, whoever we call Homer, wrote down these works, or him or his school or whatever, around the 7th or 8th century BC. But because bards at that time, and in different cultures too, are capable of memorizing verbatim huge amounts of material and passing it on as they received it a generation ago, it's quite possible that Iliad and Odyssey were not composed in 800 BC, might be 500, 600, 700 years earlier, which would put it pre-Dark Age Greece in the Bronze Age, in the Mycenaean Age, when Agamemnon actually lived and ruled Mycenae. When Homer was there in 800, and in the year 500 BC, when artists like Aeschylus were writing about Agamemnon in the Oresteia, they were writing about a kingdom that had disappeared 700 years before. It's like reading Renaissance bards talking about Camelot. They didn't know anything about England the year 400, the Saxon invasion. It's so far past it. So when we look at Iliad and Odyssey, and we see, though they're literature, when we see how the gods interact with mortals, it is truly eye-opening. And what we see is a very daimonic aspect to these gods. And that's not to say demonic in the Christian sense, but daimonic in the sense of a lower spirit, a spirit that exists between the heavens and the earth, a spirit that can do you a favor or bear a grudge, a spirit that can get you pregnant, a spirit that you can cut with a knife, a spirit that can be hopeful for something you'll do or disappointed in something you didn't do. In short, a spirit, a non-transcendent spirit that exists like you in the slipstream of time. They are subject to fate as we are in Homer's works. And as the Egyptians would say, fate is time and time is fate. Time creates fate because when you have time, then you have cause and effect and one thing follows the other, as opposed to everything being static and revealed at once. And of course, like Iamblichus would say, the gods are transcendental. They are ubiquitous, ineffable. They exist outside of time. They don't get angry, hopeful, or disappointed. They exist in perfection. And we are caught in time. And we can try to ascend to a glimpse of them by trying to transcend time and the materiality which bears the imprint of time, because we degrade and erode and, entropy, etc. But in the Bronze Age, these deities are avian, predatory. They're like raptors, and they're frequently described as the same. They exist up in the heavens on Mount Olympus, but when they see something they don't like, they rocket down just like diving eagles, and they'll smash or kill someone they don't like, or if someone that they do like, they'll snatch them up, whisk them away to a safe location where they can heal and repair. And there's a very telling image of when Athena and Apollo arranged for there to be a battle between two great warriors. They perch on a tree branch as vultures to watch it take place. The bloodless ones, as they are called, love bloodshed. They are, their sacrifice was bullocks and hecatombs of bulls, the slaughter. They can't drink it. It doesn't run in their veins. They have ichor in their veins. They drink ambrosia. They are not mortal, and they can't do what mortals do. But they share the fact that they, like us, are caught in the slipstream of time. They too are subject to fate. The difference is they can often see what's coming. And so they'll know that their son is going to die. They'll know that this city is going to fall. By the time the Iliad begins, Thetis, the sea nymph, already knows that the great Greek hero Achilles is going to die. He will never leave Troy. And she's told him that. She can't change it. The gods know that Troy is going to fall. The Greeks will win. It's predetermined. They can see it. They can't stop it. But they can live fully within the moment as we get close to that threshold. And as you know, Troy never falls during the Iliad. The Iliad's about a few really bad weeks in the Greek camp, and the actual fall of Troy and the horse and all that appears off screen, so to speak. So it's actually quite useful to look at this daimonic aspect of the gods. If you're practicing the magic of the PGM, for instance, which was written largely about 1100 years before it was even written down by Homer, because the PGM, not surprisingly, has a confusing intermix and a beautiful interplay of daimonic gods and spirits and transcendent gods and spirits. So you have the Mithras rite, or these Agathos Daimon rites, where you're calling upon solar cosmo creators to imbue you with the creational power of the universe, to elevate your soul in a theurgic way, to transcend this world and gain gnosis. And then you conjure Typhon Set, and it says, step on his toe so he can't escape, and warn him that if he doesn't do this, you'll do that, and only release him if he promises to do that. That's a daimonic aspect of that deity. They coexist. And when you read the spells, because they're not collected really in any order, you can get whiplash going back and forth between theurgic workings and thaumaturgic workings, and a transcendent deity model and a daimonic deity model, and you sometimes within the same spell. During the prayer to Selene or the hymn to the waning moon, Hecate is both conjured as a corpse-chewing grave prowling jackal-type chthonic beast, and as the great bull of heaven, whose horns are the celestial crescent of the moon, and as the primordial deity who gave birth to all things pronoia-like that sprang from her, gods and the natural world and everything like that. So in one spell, there's at least three aspects of her: transcendent, celestial, and chthonic. And yeah, you know?
Yes.
I love that, and I agree 100%. I think there is that confusion oftentimes of why is this God acting in such a petty way, or how is this God interacting with humans if they are, like you mentioned, Iamblichus says that they don't suffer passions, they're unembodied.
And I would take a sidestep for a minute into the tantric distinction, because this is a lot like the kind of language you were mentioning, Hecate, and her, to a limited perspective, these characteristics are contradictory in a way. But this is like what we see in the descriptions of Ma Kali, where she is the mother of the entire universe, but yet at the same time she is haunts the charnel grounds and is with the jackals and is upon the cremation, is in the cremation ground, and is in the filth of creation and the menstruation and all these things. And I think that part of this is the deity transcends these dualistic, these things that appear as opposites to us are transcended by the character and nature of the deity, where immanence and transcendence are interpenetrating, almost like the two triangles of Sri Yantra. These are not conflicting in the unitary consciousness of the deity. These are not things that the deity is not limited by categorical representations, but instead is able to express itself through paradox as a way to help us transcend the material and psychic limitations of the lower realm.
That's beautifully said. I mean, an obvious example of it is in current contemporary theology. God the Father is a transcendent monistic being, and Jesus Christ, though a God, lived within time, experienced things in the mortal realm, born,
Yes,
lived, died, and was buried. So it's an example of a dual aspect to deity, having both a chthonic and a transcendent existence.
Which is why I think to some of the Sikhs, Jesus is the son of Shiva, because you have this preserver form, and then you have the transcendental form of the God. What we're doing here is we're talking about the actual deity, as opposed to these names and forms which we humans use to identify them, through our own understanding, which is definitely limited by thought and word, which are meant to be in service to the deity rather than the other way around. And I think that people who get caught in discursive analytical ratiocination can, become hung up on these limited categories. Also, I would venture to add, before I have to jump off here, the daimons of a deity, of a series of a deity, the daimons and angels of that deity, they're not separate from the deity. Their minds are continuous with the mind of the deity. Their minds are one with the god or the goddess. So when you encounter a daimon who's a manifestation of Hecate or of Hermes or something, you're dealing really with a being that is expressing the nature of that deity, comes in the form of that deity, and whose mind is one with the mind of the deity.
But which is manifesting in a emanation that's not transcendent. So in a way that we can actually observe and participate with, whereas a transcendent being maybe not so much or not so easily. And I think we just lost Jack.
That's okay. He'll be back, I hope. You know what? I love that I have a kind of a homey metaphor for that, which is I've always been fascinated by the fact that the sheriff can deputize deputies. It's different from a police department. In a police department, the city hires a chief, and then the city hires a police officer, and the chief is the boss.
Mm-hmm.
But the officers are not the chief, and the chief is not the officers. But in a county, it's different. In a county, you have one law enforcement officer, which is the sheriff. And the sheriff can deputize as many people as he can. And by making them swear that oath to uphold the law in his name of the United States, they become him. They're not just hired, they're deputized, meaning he can't be everywhere. They are him when they interact with the public, because only one person is elected to enforce the law. But now they can do it. They can arrest someone, they can search a place, they can even shoot to kill under his authority. And if at any point he says to them, raise your right hand, he can have them unswear their oath, and they lose that right to exercise his innate authority to stop, to search, to arrest, to shoot. So they are him aspected in the, different personalities, of course, and different physical forms and everything else. And to some degree, a sheriff is more successful the more varied his deputies are, because they have different skills and ability. You need one covered in tattoos for underground work, and you need someone good at writing reports for the really complicated cases. You need someone good at talking to kids when you're dealing with child victims. Like, a sheriff needs a whole crowd of people of all different hues, but ultimately, in the moments when it matters, they are him. And it creates an intimate connection. Their authority and his is solely derived through each other. And I think of that sometimes when I think of, you see 20 magical voices associated with the deity repeatedly, Typhon Set, Hecate Selene, the voices we're talking about. And they have a different feel in the mouth, Aktiofi, Nebutos, Swalef, Ereshkagal. They're different, they're different.
Mm-hmm.
And yet they're often conjured together. I always envision it the same way there could be a response team. We got a guy with a dog, and you got a guy with a rifle, and you got a guy with a microphone who's good, talking down the hostage. And, they respond. What are their personalities? Who knows? The headless right, those names which recur in different spells, as we saw in the PGM, Yahweh, Sabaoth, Adonai, Elohim, and we know where they come from in Jewish lore and the Bible, but they take on independent agency in the PGM, though, we would always agree, they always seem to be emanations of that Abrahamic demiurge.
I love that example, and I'm going to ruin it here with, you have B.A. Baracus, you've got Murdoch, you've got Fate. They're all the A-team.
You're revealing your generation. High five, TEDx, high five.
Exactly. Exactly. Well, I think it's a good segue, the points that you made there, into the idea of perhaps us becoming epiphanies for the gods. We can certainly do that as well.
Oh, absolutely.
What are your thoughts on that?
What I do when I do devotional work, one aspect of it is, taking a bit of oil and putting it in both my hands, kneeling before the statue of Hecate and saying, I'm brushing my eyelids and saying, these eyes are not my eyes, but your eyes, see through them. This nose, not my nose, but your nose, breathe through it. These lips, not my lips, but your lips, speak through them. Ears, hands. And I say, let me conduct you, let me reflect you, as the moon reflects, as the sun reflects the moon, let me reflect you. And it's inviting that liminal transitional power to the extent it wishes to act through me. And, there's, you have to be kind of careful what deities you invite to do that. Obviously some are more, though the gods are not binary, they're just, some are more known for disruptive and disconnective and, stuff. But in this case, she's my go-to deity that's sort of the gatekeeper for any other spiritual work I do. So I feel comfortable with that. And I think it's worth remembering that just as we awaken our senses to say, this person giving me advice, that person criticizing me, this person coming on to me, that person, trying to trip me up, could this be an aspect of deity that's responding to or in reaction to something I'm doing? it's also useful and kind of freaky as you're interacting with people to say, could I be the same?
Mm-hmm.
Am I right now acting as Typhon said to this person? Am I right now acting as, Jupiter or Hera to this person? And just to be aware of it. I can't even add, and stop it or do more, because I suspect that free will is a lot less, less of a thing than people think. And but I do think it's part of that exercise of observing the effects, spiritual manifestation in the phenomenal world, to just ask oneself, what am I doing? What am I doing? And sometimes you'll be surprised by the answer. I find myself mentoring someone. I didn't know I wanted to do that. Well, who would be doing that? Well, what are you mentoring it? I'm teaching them ritual work. Well, that's a very mercurial, very, Hermes, a very thoughtful-like action. Could you be channeling that God? Are you honoring them? You are, clearly. But, if someone weren't, why not celebrate, invite him to more deeply infuse you with his powers? You can be a better mentor, a better teacher, a better guide and guard to this person who's put their spiritual, hopes in your hands. And across the board, for every deity, whether you're a father, lover, mother, owner of a company or something like that, to invite these powers and to be epiphanies of them. And then to actively try, I don't think we need armbands to say, what would Zeus do? But I do think you can actively try to, to think to yourself, to the extent that thinking or choice has a role. You could think, if I were an epiphany of Zeus, if Zeus were to act through me in a non-supernatural way, what would success look like in this scenario? What would it look like? It's a good question. Often we don't ask it.
Yeah, I assume it would gain you favors with that God as well. In that, if you were welcoming to strangers, then you would be kind of an emanation or an epiphany of Zeus in that way. And in which case, Janice mentioned the radio frequency, and I believe in that 100%. You would be, in participating in that way, you would be attuning yourself to that Zeus frequency and aligning yourself in that way and gaining the boons and benefits that come with aligning in that way. And kind of building off what we were talking about earlier with Iamblichus saying that the gods are free from passion, they don't suffer passion. I believe in that, and I think that the passions that we see from the gods are perhaps when we take ourselves out of attunement with those gods and we lose those boons and those benefits, it can be perceived to us as maybe the gods being angry with us because we aren't being bestowed these benefits anymore. Where in reality, we have taken ourselves out of attunement, if that makes sense.
Yes. It does have that. And there's a sense of laziness too. I know, experience it myself. You have a friend who's arrested, say a prayer, please help them escape this terrible situation. And then the corollary you followed up with, all right, other than the whole, jail collapsing, like Bacchus makes the jail do in the Bacchae, to play the Bacchae, what would that look like realistically? Well, someone's gonna have to come up with bail for this poor jerk. You're like, well, I can't make the thing collapse, but if you want to be an epiphany of Dionysus, maybe you should start. I gotta start some fucking GoFundMe for this clown.
Right.
And you think, oh, so much more work to be an epiphany of the gods. That is great for help, but you have to at least be aware of that. What would success look like? What would the answer to your prayers? And oftentimes, just visualizing that is the useful exercise. Because a lot of times we ask for help in kind of inchoate way. Please help me. Please be my friend and guide. Why do you need a guide? Why do you need a friend? What's gone wrong? There's a secondary conversation to be had there that lots of us avoid.
Absolutely. And that also reminds me of Chris Warnock in talking about astrological magic, when you're trying to kind of gain favors with the gods in the forms that they take cosmically as the planets, working with them to kind of mitigate issues where, like with Saturn, you would the number associated with Saturn, you would maybe donate to a homeless shelter for that many days in order to kind of mitigate any negative. In the case of the astrological magic or astrology, it would be to mitigate your natal chart, the issues you may have with Saturn in your natal chart. So you would perhaps give to the homeless or other things associated with Saturn. So it all really connects, which is amazing and awesome.
It is. And it's cool. It reminds me of in kind of a reverse way is in Peter Jenks's book, The Thai Occult. He talks about how Thai sorcerers, who of course come from a Buddhist culture, part of their offerings to the restless dead spirit that they raise is, if you do this for me, not only will I offer you a gift, but I'll donate money to charity in your name. And this will help the spirit's karma. It will help them transcend to whatever stage they need to next go to. So it is within the paradigm of the spirituality to reward them by doing a good deed, even if they're doing like something nefarious. Part of that is helping process the spirit by offering something that aligns it with a higher source and helps it ascend. So it's kind of cool in that it's a reminder that even if you're doing chthonic work or necromantic work or thaumaturgical work or whatever, there you can always come up with, sort of a celestial or transcendent paradigm that you're part of, and at least to ask yourself, am I participating in a creative and healthy way in my role in creation, or am I, am I like Mercury retrograde, setting everyone back?
Right. And I've seen it with even with like folk magic with Catholicism. You pray to the saint, and if the saint comes through, then you donate to the church in that saint's name. Nice. I was wondering if you can expand on the whole Thai paradigm, and because we spoke about this earlier, and how it's, speaking of similarities, how it has a lot of similarities with like things you find in antiquity, specifically the PGM.
Well, I'll say this, and it's cool that you brought it up. And I don't practice Thai magic, but I have read Peter Jenks's book, The Thai Occult, and I was startled when I read it how many parallels existed between Thai folk magic and the magic of the PGM, of the Greek magical papyri. And I mean, there are too many to number here, but what's remarkable is here's two locations 4,000 miles apart in two different times, almost 2,000 years apart, and they share a similar paradigm. In Thai magic, when someone dies violently and they're buried on a certain day, a day associated, with division and restlessness, the sorcerer will go to the graveyard, will try to get some materia from their body, will light candles, will ask for a useful spirit to come, invite that spirit to come, or if not that one, another one similar. They might focus on the spirit of a soldier or a policeman if they want a martial spirit, or a spirit of a courtesan if they want beautiful lovemaking spirit. And they will ask them to imbue an oil or something like that. And then they'll go and either fashion, either the oil to something that can be used, or a statue or a mannequin or something like that, having conjured and had, a communication with and made offerings to and made promises to, and then finally incorporated it into materia for a working. And they'll do that. And then part of the offering saying, I will help you, I'll donate money to this orphanage, perhaps in your name, which will help your karma or whatever. So you have flowers or fruit, and you also have an offering that's spiritual. And you look at that, and they also, of course, will collect materia, not just from, like car wreck or something, but, from a tree that was killed by a parasite, or a crossroads at a graveyard, and incorporate it in their amulets and that sort of thing. Incorporate dice or incorporate, metal shavings. And it's directly in line, as you know, with many of the workings in the PGM. The activating ingredient is always a restless soul. The restless spirit, they're not your friends, they're the fuel of the working. They're there to be conjured, they're the agent, right? It's not enough just to wish generally, my intention will make it happen. No, for a lot of this magic, especially if it's sick-making or lust-making magic, you go to someone where they were violently killed or buried, and you call upon that spirit that died young or violently, and you call it, you conjure it using the spells, You leave an offering, usually a food or a libation. You compel it. You put it in, if you have the material, certainly a bit of clothing, a bit of hair, that's best of all, a bit of bone. But if not, you can ask it to imbue the dust over its grave. Then you use that to activate a charm, to cause lust, to cause sickness, cause whatever. And you can ask it to be, to treat you well, not to be angry with you. And then asking some other god who's doing the heavy lifting, Hecate, Anubis, Hermes, Chthonios, Osiris, make sure the spirit does what I tell it. Don't let it get out of hand. You rule it. We can't rule it. We can't see it. We'll know if it's affected by the result. But we call upon a spiritual mediator to manage the unseen power that we've called upon, the restless dead, and then tell it to go and do its thing. And you look at both of these, you're like, wow, and that is a large spectrum of both the PGM work and the stuff that Jenks talked about in Thai occult, and including the PGM. They frequently say, get the water from a shipwreck, get the wood from a boat that foundered, get the iron from a shackle. These items are associated with people that have been in bondage, that probably drowned, things like that. You combine them in a way that they still attain a bit of that virtue of that restless spirit. And then you combine them and you engage with them with the spirit mediator and ask them to do this or that, or not to do this or that. But to me, it's super exciting because it comes from two completely different cultures. It functions under the same paradigm, and some of the same techniques are even used, which is quite exciting because A, it shows that the PGM wasn't just a bunch of BS that one person made up out of their mind completely with no connection to tradition, history, or anything like that. It shows that, obviously it is related to prior pharaonic magic, but it also shows, just as sorcerer's tech, it's not unique. It has parallels in the Far East, some of them startlingly close to each other. And what's fun is that then, because the PGM has full of lacunae, and some gaps, you can then look to Thai magic, which has a very good record because it's still practiced today, folk magic, and say, oh, well, I may fill in the gap with that technique. In both of them, they talk about using, the PGM will talk about Anubis thread, right? But it never quite describes what Anubis thread is. It's supposed to tie it in 100 knots or 365 knots, saying Abrasax to stand for the year. But it never explains how to get it. We suspect it might have been thread used for funerals because Anubis was the god of undertakers. He's the one that prepared Osiris's corpse. Well, in Thai magic, they will actually use thread that's used, to dress a corpse as a magical thread to bind two wax figures together or something like that. They'll use funeral thread. So it's not, right. And so you look at it and you're like, okay, it's not 100% sure, but it's very likely they're doing the same thing, using funereal thread to allow the spirits of the dead or the god of the dead to bind, and stuff like that is very exciting. And Thai magic, they'll start working with candles in a graveyard. And if a candle blows out, it's over. It's done. It's a sign the spirit's not pleased or they're restless. That doesn't exist. And if you're like me, candles go out all the time. I read that and I was like, oh, well, maybe I should have paid more attention, But it's useful, if you want to adopt that tech, you can try it and see if it works. They have a great phrase that they use. And Jenks did a good job interviewing the actual sorcerers, the Thai sorcerers that do the work, where they say often the ghost approaches from behind, which is really cool, because if you're like me and you don't have visions all the time, a lot of the best you get is that prickling at the back of the neck and the goosebumps along the arm. And suddenly you think, I feel like someone's standing behind me. And that's what they're talking about. And that's when they know something's come. And so I can now switch to having a conversation with it, because I'm not expecting to see it most of the time, because the ghost usually approaches from behind. So stuff like that I find hugely exciting, because it can be easily applied to these workings in ways that aren't always spelled out, since, of course, the PGM spells were written by an adept for his, by a master for his adept, and presumably they're practicing daily, so they don't always spell out every little thing they do.
Right. Well, being that these systems are so similar and so compatible, obviously, I mean, anyone who's studied it for any time it's hard to deny the compatibility. Yeah, it's very exciting where you can kind of interject these other things from Buddhism, from hoodoo.
Yeah.
It does work pretty well. I have found though that people are, which it's kind of funny, they're almost nationalistic in a way, where they want to keep something like the PGM or Western magic pure, which is funny because we're talking about Greco-Roman Egypt.
Yeah, it's like the least
Yeah.
pure, the least homogenous culture you can imagine, you know. And especially since it's within the paradigm, you know. And the paradigm is relational spirit work, usually with the restless dead or daimonic versions of the gods. And that, it transcends cultures, that type of work. It's, you know, they that type of work. And there's interesting tips you can draw from it, like Thai sorcerers, when they're dealing with a dangerous restless dead spirit. They might put on lipstick or cross-dressed or wear nail polish, something they don't normally do in real life, to create confusion. It acts as a mask, you know? And so if I were going to call, let's say, a restless spirit that I was actually worried about, I think this is a dangerous spirit, I could either do exactly that, or I might just get a translucent piece of black cloth and wrap it around my face and tie it off. I can still see through it, but now I'm masked like the Thai sorcerer. I'm going to deal with that spirit. It'll believe who I tell it to believe. I'm not going to give it my real name. I'm going to declare myself to be Hermes Thoth. I'm going to declare myself to be the servant of, the priest of Hecate. I'll declare myself to be John Smith. It doesn't need to know my name. It needs to do what it's meant to do. And here's what it's going to do. So that idea of masking can translate, even if you're not doing it exactly the way the example gave. And, you know, but you can see correspondences of that appear right away. In Eastern Europe, you know, postmenopausal women will do magic. They're in a liminal state. They might let their hair down, which never happens when you're a mature woman. It's always up in traditional society. So to let it down is a mask in a way, you know, or this idea of cross-dressing during magical ceremonies isn't just Thai, right? You know, the whole idea that priests wear robes, you know, wear essentially a black dress, and monks, like there's something there of masking who you are in certain ways. It's wonderful because these things about their practice, they're very practical, and the paradigm translates. You can find ways to apply it in ways that are completely consistent with the working. And to me, it's a great indicator that this work is valid, that it comes from a true tradition of spirit work, that it can be accessed today. It's not just generically UPG. Sometimes people throw away that word as if, even if I create a magical system tomorrow of worshiping spaghetti monster by burning Cheerios, that's no different than the sorcerer in the PGM saying burn myrrh to call forth Hecate Selene. But it is different. It is different. The first is UPG. And who knows, if I get results, maybe I'll start my own school. And 1,000 years from now, it'll be a thing. But right now, it's completely UPG. Burning myrrh to Hecate Selene, it comes from, that spell was written by an individual who experienced inspiration in the moment. Those words came from human tongue and not divine hand that floated in the air. But that conjuration is a valid traditional current of conjuration and magic with roots far deeper than the written language that has parallels all over the world, and the Thai magic shows that. So.
Okay, Jack. Well, we're looking at over 2 hours. I can certainly continue talking to you for another 2, but I don't know if our listeners have the stamina for that. And I'm sure you have other things to do today. What do you have going on? Where can people find you? Is there anything that you're doing that's current that people can kind of look into and tap into?
Yeah, thanks for asking, man. I do teach a couple times a year this class on Hecate. It's a 13-week class at the Blackthorn School. You go to theblackthornschool.com and you can find it. It's always re-upping in a few months. I do teach twice a year this class on the PGM, where we do, as you know, a year-long exploration of the PGM with a different spell a week and discuss and explore the workings. And that starts in August of 2021 and in winter of 2022. And that's at the Blackthorn School as well. And then I have this class on Homer going in the Iliad and Odyssey called God's Song. And anyone interested in that could go to my website, jackgrayle.com, and find a link to that. So thank you for asking. All comers are welcome. We have a good time, and there's a lot of camaraderie and a lot of people find friends and make new discoveries. It's really enjoyable to be part of these groups.
I actually very much enjoy the PGM class. I can recommend that very highly. And, for nerds like me, to get a curated weekly commentary on PGM spells is just heaven. For the end of the week, it's a hard work week, and then to look forward to that is great. So good work. Jack puts a lot of passion into his work and a lot of very interesting insight. So appreciate you very much coming on. It's been a long time coming. I've been wanting to do this for a while. Sorry that Janice disappeared, but he's got stuff going on. But yeah, just thank you again for your time and for your thoughtful responses and for the education you've given us and our audience.
Well, fantastic. It's been great to be on. Thank you for inviting me. It's been great to talk. You have a great week.
Thanks, Jack.
That was the phenomenal Jack Grayle. We're very pleased to have had him on the show. In my opinion, he's putting out some very high quality material. Dominic, I'm sure, agrees. And I do want to put it out there. I want to venture to say that it is important to make this distinction. We usually frown upon people in the so-called marketplace selling their wares, because most of them are hawking shabby reproductions, knockoffs. In Jack's case, you're dealing with the equivalent of a college course. The material he teaches is rigorously composed, delivered in an educated manner, and it is of the highest quality. I think he and Susan Chang, who is also a guest on our show, are really just exemplifying a certain level of quality, kind of like Sarita, who is another person who I deeply respect. These people are putting material out there that is worth your time. Material worthy of, as I've said, a collegiate level course. This is collegiate level education. This is not just how to do magic, how to do quote unquote thaumaturgy or sorcery. This is bound up with some of those practices and ideas. But more importantly, we're going into human culture. We're going into the depths of understanding the culture of the gods and the nature of intercourse with the invisible world and the imaginal realm. We're looking at historical sources, drawing on actual archaeological and textual evidence. And because of that, these people who are shining stars amongst a mire of imitators are bringing things to a respectable level, a level that could be approached by someone who has gone through the disciplines of serious study in the academies and come out of it with a respect and a healthy appreciation for the material. So I just want to make that distinction here, because we do usually disparage certain individuals who shall not be named because they want to be internet culture personalities. It's more about profanation of the sacred and hubris and lack of piety. And I would say that Jack is guilty of none of those things, where in fact, I would say that he is filled with piety and devotion to the gods. And his entire approach is one of awe before the magnificence of the Supreme.
Yeah, nicely said. I totally agree, obviously. So yeah, and as far as the thaumaturgy, theurgy conversation, I think Jack is a great example of a very nice balance of the two things. Obviously, something like the PGM is very thaumaturgic. That's undeniable. There's a lot of wonder working. There's a lot of petitioning. There's a lot of coercion. I mean, these things are obvious, and Jack will tell you just as much. But there is what we've been trying to kind of bring home is the importance of striking a balance. It doesn't have to be one or the other, which is kind of the attitude nowadays in some circles, which is strange. I think, like anywhere else, having a balance is probably the most optimal thing you can do. So, again, we thank Jack for coming on. He's just a wealth of inspiration and just really interesting insight coming from a place of praxis. The insights that Jack has are, to me, it's obvious that these are coming from a place of deep personal practice and experience. When I first came across Jack's stuff, I sent it over to Janice, and we both agreed that he was definitely the real deal. So very happy he was able to come on and chat with us. And we hope that you follow him and see what he's up to for your own continued learning.
And I would venture to say also that reality is built from the bones and flesh of the gods. When you walk on the ground, you're walking on the body of the gods. When you breathe the air, you're breathing the substance of the gods. This is fundamental to an archaic orientation. Because of that, thaumaturgy is effective, because the names of the gods have inherent power, because the gods are present everywhere, because reality is constructed from their existence and was built by them, but also from them. Because of that, thaumaturgy is effective. But like a teacher of mine once said, do you really need to call the president to clean the toilet? I think that's a pretty good analogy. There's a certain kind of profanation that occurs in the common parlance. These things do sort of reverberate back within the soul, because the gods are also in the soul. The divine is within the soul. God, the supreme God, however you want to put it, is within the soul as well. And we should have due reverence to our own true nature, our own true divine self, and be cautious in the way that we employ the potentials that lie sleeping resident within the depths of the soul. And it might be wise to let sleeping dogs lie, or sleeping dragons lie even. I mean, there's nuances and complexities here, but if a person uses thaumaturgy for material means, there's nothing wrong with that. But our hope, and I think the aim, is that by the employment of these procedures, the person will be led to, simply by actuating these divine potentials, by calling on the names, by doing the work, they should be led to some type of congress with the sacred, with the divine, that in turn may elevate their perspective and draw them naturally into a theurgic orientation, where they begin to see the sacred everywhere in everything. That's the hope. That's the aim.
Okay, Janice, what do you got for everybody as far as our book review?
I think people who are willing to do the college course level study of these matters will find it very helpful. It is Epilogomena. I probably said that word wrong. Epilogomena. And Themis by Jane Ellen Harrison. The full name of the book is Epilogomena to the Study of Greek Religion, and Themis, a study of the social origins of Greek religion. This is a truly excellent book. Epilogomena, it's actually two books in one, really. Epilogomena and Themis but they're together in this volume. This is the level of quality that the Bollingen publishers would have put out. So people familiar with the work of Jung and Korban and Coomaraswamy and those folks would be familiar with this level of quality in study. It's pretty incredible. The first volume, or the first half of the book, because it's 2 books in one, covers primitive ritual, primitive theology, and then the remnants in modern day. In Themis, it really gets even deeper. It goes into, for instance, the Dithyram, the Carides, the Thunderites, the origin of the Olympic Games, even Daimon and Hero, from Daimon to Olympian. And here's just a brief selection of some of the topics that are covered. There's the bull sacrament of Atlantis, Mars as the year god, reincarnation of ancestors, Themis as collective conscience, and the Woodpecker King, psychology of magic, from Daimon to Olympian is very interesting chapter. The Titanomachia. So she's very thorough in her explorations of ancient Greek religion. And really there's no stone left unturned in this book. It's the kind of book that I cut my teeth on when I was younger, books such as this, and some earlier works like the Gnostics and Their Remains on Gnosticism and things like that, the works of G.R.S. Mead, the works of Carigny. This is really where you're going to find the kind of magic that we talked about with Jack. But I strongly recommend anybody interested in the Greek magical papyri, ancient Greek religion, ancient Greek magic, to pick this book up. It's going to take you a while to read through. It is it's actually, including the index, it is 600 pages. So it is not a small book, but it will really, really pay you back in dividends. It'll pay your investment back in dividends in terms of attention. And you will understand so much more about the Greek understanding of the sacred from this book.
Awesome. And can you say the name and author again, and maybe spell the name as well?
Epilegomena to the Study of Greek Religion, and Themis, a study of the social origins of Greek religion, by Jane Ellen Harrison. It was published by University Books, New Hyde Park, New York. Epilegomena is Epilegomena.
And thank you for listening, everyone. We really appreciate your listenership and your support. If you want to follow us, please do so on Facebook. That's a pretty easy place to follow what we're up to. You can also find us on YouTube and all of the podcast places where you find podcasts. And so that would be it for now. Janice, anything else?
No, that's it. I'm just grateful for everybody that listens to our podcast and supports it. I'm glad to be back on track and, getting back into the mix of things with this. We have some great people lined up for the future, and I'm looking forward to it.
Yep, same here. Okay, everyone, thank you, and we'll see you next time.